Okay, so we're back. Now, first thing, we want to talk about the Native Americans. That's one of our three, right? Okay, so the Native Americans, I put this down. This is what they look like, all right? The typical Indian with feather in their hair, Obviously, some had more than others, blah, 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 blah. All right, the Indians. Now, we talked about who they are. Some of you have done research on their different cultures. But let's back it up. They would be the first to reach this area that we know of as America, right? Where did they come from? What did they have to do to get here? Well, that journey begins over here in Egypt. All right, so this area right around here, we'll back up a little bit, right? This northern part of Africa, Egypt, that is thought to be the birthplace of civilization. All humanity is thought to have begun in this general area. Let's back it up, all right? Where is that? Well, that's way over here. So how did Native Americans, how did Indians get to America from this general region? Well, they didn't, contrary to the Puritans and the settlers, they didn't cross the Atlantic. The idea is instead that they traveled over this Asian continent right here, populating this whole thing. And, well, let me put it in so it'll come better. They ended up traveling over across the land bridge. Way up here, see that little area right in between here? It's called the Bering Strait. That's a land bridge between what is current day Alaska and what was Russia. So they come up here. This is near the North Pole. I mean, up here, that's where it's cold, right? So they travel across this land bridge down through Canada, across the Rocky Mountain, which you saw that there, that area, right there. You see it in green? That's the Rocky Mountains. They cross these very tall mountains, right? And they get to populate what is now America. So what we see as America was actually gotten to through these northern land bridges. Now they travel across, well, down through Canada, over the Rockies, all the way over here because, we have to get to Virginia. We have to get to the eastern coast over here before we get to where the Puritans came in. Now the Puritans, all up here in this area right here. So the Indians that they met had traveled this whole distance to get here. Now that may not seem like much to you now, but think about it. They didn't have maps. They didn't have any concept of where they were going. These were people traveling for the first time to areas that had never been seen before by humans. That was pretty adventurous. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what they would hit, where they would end up. That is a spirit that we see inside the Native American culture that I think is also found in some of the other worldviews that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Okay, so now that we've got their journey here, you think about how the Native Americans stopped off and you had the different tribes, right? Think about the Lewis and Clark journey. They traveled up the Missouri here and they get into South Dakota and all of that, and you have the different Sioux Indians and everything else. But Indians traveled this whole place and then populated it. Very daring, very adventuresome. So let's go to our next group. Well, the next group that comes to America are the Puritans. This is what they look like. Now, I like this picture down here. It says, God is our strength, in God we trust. So it brings us to the question of why do we have Puritans arriving here on the eastern seaboard of the United States? Let's back that up a little bit further. Where did they come from? Well, they came from England. So they crossed the Atlantic, and here's where they're from. Now, why did they come? Well, Europe was very settled. You know, I've been to England, and there are castles in Europe that are still standing today that are literally older than the United States itself, older than our country. Europe was not a wild wilderness untamed like what they found in America. Europe was very settled. It had history, it had culture, it had governments, it had some, quote, the modernist conveniences of their time. They had, in some instances, they had plumbing. What would make a group of people leave that area of civilization and come halfway across the world to a uninhabited, largely, except for the Indians, wilderness, where they would have to cut out their own towns from the forest? That's a good question. Well, here we're looking at England, and we should actually be looking at the larger section of Europe itself. That includes Germany and France and Spain and Denmark. All of this area right here was very well established with culture and with cities and towns. But they were also established with something else: monarchies, kings and queens that ruled the land. Well, back then, the king or queen was not only the political head, meaning they ran the government, but they were also the religious head, meaning that chances are they were in charge of the church as well, particularly here in England. Now, in England, the King of England was not only the head of the government, but he was also head of the church. Okay, so think about the recent wedding of, I forgot his name. The Prince of Wales. Anyway, that's Kate and whoever. You watched their wedding, or if you did, or if you didn't. Anyway, they did it in the church. They didn't do it in just any church. They did it in Westminster, right? And who did the ceremony? Well, that was the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the head of the English church. So when they got married in the church, they did that specifically, not only just to get married, but it was also because the English king is, even to this day, the symbol of the English church. So, now let's go back into dark times when we talk about the Puritans. Back then, the king decided what religion you were. So, if the king was Catholic, the whole country, Scotland, Ireland, the United Kingdom, the whole country was Catholic. But if the next king were not Catholic, and let's say he was a Protestant, then the whole country would be Protestants. So it was this back and forth of what religion we are based on who the king was, right? Because if you were a religion the king wasn't, he could punish you because he, after all, is the king, right? This really bothered the Puritans, these guys. It bothered them. So what they did, that was the reason they left England, right? They left England and came, let's see that again, they came all the way, click that right, to America, right? And somehow, okay. So they come, I don't know what about that. All right. So they come to America. Now, the difference